evening, peoples, and welcome back to my living room with me and my friend Gingersnap here, who has been chatty this evening, so she has some other things to say. So last week we just started a deep dive into the Ten Commandments, and I even got around to restringing my Ten Commandments bracelet, so now I have a handy reference for them just by knowing them anyway. The commandments as we remember them in the Reformed Protestant tradition, if we were Catholic or Lutheran or Jewish or a handful of other traditions, we might count them out a bit differently. So to recap, 1, God alone is God, so don't worship any other gods. 2, don't bow down to idols, don't make graven images. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images is, of course, the King James wording. 3, don't misrepresent God's will, because words matter and what we say matters. 4, keep the Sabbath day, so rest on the Sabbath. 5, honor your parents. The family unit should be respected and kept together. 6, don't murder. You know, the one that really shouldn't need to be said, and yet somehow does. Don't murder. 7, don't commit adultery when 2 people stand in front of their community and make vows before God. It's not scratchy post time, Gingersnap, it's Bible study time. Those vows mean something. 8, don't steal or you'll go to jail, behind bars. 9, don't lie. And 10, don't covet. So tonight we are looking at what we understand as the second commandment. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the 3rd and the 4th generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. This is an interesting one, and one of the longer verses within the Ten Commandments. It's got multiple verses dedicated to it. So an interesting thing about language, the word we translate as our God is a jealous God. The word in Hebrew can mean jealous, as in like jealousy, wanting to keep what you have, but it can also mean like especially passionate. It can go either way, which is an interesting quirk of language. So in the King James Bible, which a lot of people grew up with, it's got a really lovely, very poetic cadence to it, especially in the Psalms. It's not necessarily the most accurate translation for a lot of reasons in many parts throughout, but it's a very nice sounding one. The King James Bible has a ban on graven images, which is not necessarily the most modern English of phrases. The Hebrew refers to an idol or an image that is in the likeness, form, or representation of anything above the earth, on the earth, in the water, or beneath the water. There's a little bit of a difference between an idol and a graven image in that I know what an idol is. I don't necessarily offhand know how to give a good definition of graven image, so there's that. So we probably don't go around in our everyday lives making literal statues of God. Or at any rate, I definitely do not, in large part because I am not a particularly artsy person. It would not look good if I tried to make a statue of anything, honestly, other than maybe a stick. I could probably pull that off. We are tempted to reduce God to something simple or easy, and that might be a better way of looking at it. If we think of God as only being the good shepherd, for example, then that I mean, that's a beautiful, wonderful image, and one that we'll be looking at this week. But it excludes a lot of other imagery for God. In a lot of churches, especially, for example, the one that I grew up in, we tend to focus on language of God as Father, which can be extremely meaningful for some people, not me, and it can be extremely exclusive to some people, like me, because some of us don't have fathers who love them or are good people to look up to. Yeah, it can be easier to have God as just one thing, but God is everything, which complicates things a lot, to put it mildly. It would be easier if we had the kind of God who could be easily defined or put in a box. In a lot of ways, it would be easier to have a God of the oceans and a God of the earth and a God of the rains and a God of the rivers and a God of the specific lake and a God of the bean market, because those are more graspable. But a God of everything can't be reduced to something that can be held in your hands. So we might understand an idol to be a person or an object that we give like an inordinate amount of power. So maybe when we expect a single person to fix all of society's problems, I don't care who they are or how much you love or respect them, they can't fix everything. Maybe they can fix a lot of things, but they can't fix everything. And, you know, then at some point they're gonna die or retire and there will still be problems there. Not that single people can't make great changes, but one single person cannot fix everything. So maybe thinking that a certain purchase will transform your life, maybe a treadmill or a house in a certain neighborhood, it might change your life, but it won't fix all of your problems. Maybe if we put more emphasis on a lucky jersey than on time spent practicing the sport, or thinking that any entity other than Jesus, obviously other than Jesus, is completely perfect and absolutely without flaws. I have known a person or two in my life who literally described themselves as perfect, and yeah, that seems like maybe a good place to start in considering one's own flaws. That's got a little judgy of me there. Apologies. So what maybe are some examples of places in our lives or society that we put far too much pressure on a person or an object or an idea than is reasonable? So this also reminds me to bring up the line in Luke, "You cannot serve both God and wealth." Luke 6:24, which I think would be a relevant example of this. That if you put too much power on the concept of money to fix everything, then you're not relying on God or giving God credit. Money can accomplish a lot of great things, like, I don't know, not starving or having a place to live, which are cool, or being able to help or provide for other people. But money in and of itself isn't going to fix everything. You still have to put an effort and get back up. Yeah, your toe razors don't really need to go into my leg. Thank you very much. So in the Jewish tradition, there's a fairly broad understanding of idols. So it's not just images, but it might include nationalism or pilgrimages or the obsession with money, which, hey, what did I just say? The worship of animals or people, even the use of idols or images in the context of the worship of God, which maybe is what we might more traditionally or specifically think of when we think of idols. So in the Jewish tradition, art is generally considered to be okay. It's more the intent. I mean, like, did the artist intend for this piece of art to be worshipped? Probably not okay. Did the artist intend for this piece to inspire people or provoke thought or emotion? I mean, that's what the point of art should be. That's cool. So in the Protestant tradition, this gets very dicey and fascinating ways. Actually, even before the Protestant tradition, there have been points in Christian history when we have been very, very against images. I had one of my crosses I was going to show that has a little engraving on it that's taken from the catacombs in Rome. So if you're living in an illiterate society, then it's pretty handy to have a system of symbols or pictures that help to tell a story or help to teach a story or illustrate a story, or just, symbols tell other people something. So, for example, in our Western society, it is generally understood that someone who's wearing a ring on their left ring finger is married or engaged. And that is a visual representation of something. So for the early Christians, they kind of had a secret code that if you weren't in the know, you might not notice it or necessarily know what it means. But if you were Christian, you would have a fish, maybe outside your house, or you might wear like a fish necklace or something, or scratched in the dirt for whatever reason. So the fish would mean that you were a follower of Christ, because in Greek, the word ichthus, the individual letters can stand for the phrase Jesus Christos Theos Huios Soxa, Jesus Christ, Son of God, saves. So that's a neat little thing there. Fun fact. Anyway, so point being, I've got a little cross with an engraving of a fish that's taken from the Roman catechisms that I meant to show off anyway, and I forgot to do that. So for the past couple centuries, most of us have been literate, so the role of art takes a slightly different role. So during the Protestant Reformation, John Calvin, who is a fascinating and very important figure, probably wouldn't have been super fun at dinner parties, but there you go. He was very anti-art in churches. And so there was a point in the Protestant Reformation when we went through old churches and we took down art or broke windows, and part of me, the part that has a history degree is, no, don't ruin the beautiful things. I love stained glass. It's my favorite art medium. How could you? No, stop it. It belongs in a museum, to get all Indiana Jones in here. Anyway, but on the other hand, if you have an extremely elaborate church, not that beautiful things aren't inspiring, and a lot of the architecture of churches inspires you to look up literally and metaphorically and feel small and part of something big and grand and immense and ancient. And that can be a very powerful thing. But at what point are we spending more resources on making a church beautiful than we are on spending resources caring for a community? This is a really, really tough line to draw. So in most Protestant churches that have been built since the Reformation, so, literally any Protestant church in this country, generally speaking, you don't see art of like people or saints or Bible figures. There might be something more abstract or more like scenery, pastoral kind of thing. So in our church, we have somewhat abstract windows. We have a burning bush, kind of fiery image, and we've got like a ship on the sea and a cross. So not like people. Whereas there are also traditions where you might have something a bit more like this necklace that I am wearing, which is a little tiny icon of Saint Wilgefortis, who is my favorite saint. So there are traditions where an image of a saint is considered almost a window into the divine. Not traditions that I am super familiar with, so I don't really want to comment on those. So more, it's a reminder of a person and what they did for the faith, and maybe a reminder to have courage and be strong in your own faith. Saint Wilgefortis is my favorite saint. I did a service in her for her story last summer because she is awesome. You could check that out if you really want to scroll through things. So when I wear my little tiny saint medallion, who unfortunately was not a historical figure, she's more of a myth and a legend, and a great one. It's a... So once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess who was supposed to be married off to a pagan lord. And she's like, actually, no thank you, Dad, because I am a Christian and I would prefer to dedicate my life to God rather than be sold off in a land deal and marry this pagan lord guy. He's like, no, you're in timeout, by which I mean I'm throwing you in my dungeon because I've got one of those, I'm a king. And anyway, she's like, hey, God, please help me out here. I'm in a tough situation. There's a rock in a hard place and I'm here. So anyway, God produces a miracle, and so she grows a full beard. And so her dad is horrified and her fiance is horrified. And so the wedding is off, of course, and so her dad has her crucified. Anyway, so there's a few more cultural things going on of why this story was told or explained things, but she is the patron saint of women trying to get out of difficult situations, but she's also a female saint who is not conventionally beautiful and who was martyred for a choice that she actively made rather than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so anyway, she is a great reminder that women have power to do things, even if it's not fitting into the narrative that society tells us that maybe we should. So I think that she's a great story. Anyway, so point being, images can remind us of stories, encourage us to live out certain qualities, and just remind us to think about God and our faith in our daily life. Yeah, I mean, are people necessarily reading the Bible every day? I mean, maybe they should, but realistically they probably aren't. But if you are wearing a cross, then that might remind you when you put it on, I believe in this, this is important to me, this is what should motivate my choices today. Something like that. Pretty sure that most of those points are far from the notes that I had scribbled out. Anyway, so then in the Muslim tradition, which also, of course, reads the Hebrew Bible and the Ten Commandments, the interpretation is, again, a bit different. And so art in Islam tends to be more often word-based. It might have a lot of calligraphy, which is neat. Or maybe geometric patterns or like abstract stuff or floral designs. So that's very... I kind of like that that's very intentional in creating any art. That when you create something beautiful, but it's remembering that we are not God, that we can only create certain things. But again, not a tradition with which I am immensely familiar, so don't super want to comment on that. Yeah, so anyway, do not make unto thee any graven images. Is very open to interpretation in Christianity and throughout history and throughout many different faith groups. So whether or not it applies to you might depend on whether you consider yourself to be an artist, or what you consider the purpose of art to be. And I do think it's an interesting and important thing to consider of why we have certain things in our churches, or where we put them, or how much emphasis we put on them, because at the end of the day, a physical object, no matter how valuable or beautiful or old it might be, is not as important as what we believe and the way that we live out our faith. So we've now covered 20% of the commandments, such as they are. So we will return next week for the third commandment, which apparently Gingersnap is very excited about. So we hope to see some of you tomorrow night for our Wednesday evening prayer. Also, since this week we have Earth Day, well, I had this plan of live streaming an Earth Day service from outside, but it is currently snowing. So there might be some slight adaptations made to this plan on account of it's very cold. But Thursday is Earth Day, so we will be having in some form an Earth Day service and garden blessing on Facebook Live at 7 on Thursday. So hopefully it's not frozen outside. Yay, spring. Anyway, so good night to you all, and I hope that you are all well.